Good morning, and thank you for joining me on the Path to Liberty for July 29th, 2019. My name is Michael Boldin. We're broadcasting live from my home office and studio here in downtown Los Angeles for the 10th Amendment Center, where we broadcast every single Monday, Wednesday, and Friday at 9:30 a.m. Pacific time. So good morning to you, good afternoon, good evening, whenever you happen to be tuning in, whether it's live or in the archive. I'm very grateful for you spending some time with me today. I hope you had an awesome weekend. I had a really good one, and I hope you did as well. We do broadcast through our channels over at YouTube, Facebook, Periscope, Twitch, and DLive. Plus, we have archives over at BitChute and Brighteon.com. And we also, of course, have a podcast edition, iTunes, Spotify, Stitcher, Google, and elsewhere. I appreciate all the positive reviews and feedback that we've gotten, whether it's reviews on iTunes, comments, likes, shares, subscriptions, emails, all that stuff, and of course, all the memberships that we've been getting coming in as a support for the show. Thank you so very much. We have all of our archives, show notes, previous episodes, all that stuff at 10thamendmentcenter.com/path to liberty. Again, 10thamendmentcenter.com/path to liberty. And that's my introduction. So today we're talking about bipartisanship. And if you remember what George Carlin, RIP, what George used to say, he put it this way, quote, "The word bipartisan usually means some larger than usual deception is being carried out." And this time, we're talking about a ripoff kind of deception, and we're going to cover the latest Trump-Pelosi scheme to drive the country to what we're calling basically bipartisan fiscal suicide. And to do that, first of all, I'm going to go a little bit back in time. Actually, I'm going to go a lot back in time. I'm going to start out with George Washington and talk about what he had to say about spending and debt and using the public credit. And then I'm going to go to some statements on spending, the debt ceiling, and the like from the president. 2011, 2013, let me take a look at my notes, 2016 on how his approach on that. Then we're going to look at the latest spending insanity that passed out of the Imperial House this last week, and it is almost certainly going to pass the Senate if it hasn't already. I mean, I don't even know. It has the full backing of the president. I expect it to get signed very soon. We'll look at a couple other things, and I think I'm going to wrap it up with James Madison, kind of have good bookends between Washington and Madison. So anyways, before getting to that, I do want to take a look over at the live chat because I love it when people join in live. And if you can't, that's cool too. I'm grateful for everybody. But thank you all for everyone who is here right now. Tyler B., Justin Bayola, Gerard Perry, Ward Lawrence. Good to see you guys over on YouTube. On Facebook, Michael Bogus, Dawn Freya. Or is it Freya? From Kentucky. Good to see you, Dawn. Suzanne Sperry, awesome. Really appreciate you being here. Shane Lackey as well. Dennis Gutkey. Daniel Howard Johnson. Lee Evan Neher. I don't know if I say your name right, Lee. It was really great hanging out with you at the RLC event recently. Andrew Nappy. Theodore Lee. I appreciate everyone. I know I'm skipping some people, maybe on some different platforms. I appreciate you guys being here today. If you have questions, comments, thoughts about what we're talking about as we go through, I will look back in the chat a little bit later on in the show. And of course, I do always pop in and look sometime over the day. I will look in and maybe reply to some comments as I'm able to as well. So please continue to do that. Leave some comments, whether you are live or in the archive. So let's get into this. First of all, let's start out with George Washington. First president, loved by many at the time. Whether he was awesome or not is not really the discussion. But in his farewell address, which I've covered many times, he warned about using debt, what they called public credit. And this is how he put it. I'm going to read through this whole thing. I think it's important to actually cover this in full. It's one paragraph. As a very important source of strength and security, cherish public credit. He means if you want to have a strong, secure country, you really have to think smartly and care greatly about the public credit, how much you're spending, how much you're putting into debt. He said one method of preserving it is to use it as sparingly as possible. Sparingly. Use it as sparingly as possible, avoiding occasions of expense by cultivating peace. He recognized, of course, that war and war policy led to huge debt. And huge debt weakens the country and makes it less secure. He said, but remembering also that timely disbursements to prepare for danger frequently prevent much greater disbursements to repel it. In other words, be strong economically so you can deal with problems. The weaker you are, the more dangerous of a situation it is. Going on, avoiding likewise the accumulation of debt, not only by shunning occasions of expense, shunning them. Not just turning them down, but shunning them. This is bad. But by vigorous exertions in time of peace to discharge the debts, which unavoidable wars may have occasioned, not ungenerously throwing upon posterity the burthen which we ourselves ought to bear. I mean, I could do a whole show just on that. I've done a show on his farewell warning. We've got articles on what Washington had to say. It was really drafted by Madison. Obviously, kind of a collaboration there. But there is a lot to be said there. There is a lot, basically nothing that he said in his farewell address, at least in that paragraph, is being implemented by politicians today and many of their supporters as well. In fact, it goes the other direction. They basically brag about all the ways they are doing things opposite. They're not saying maybe like, oh, I hate George Washington. I don't think that would be a real popular position for a president, any president. And so they're basically attacking, doing the complete opposite of everything that Washington and Madison advised there. So let's take a look at what the president today has had to say. Some very good things, actually. If you go back to 2011, let's take a look at 2011, this tweet. A little short walk down memory lane when Barack Obama was in office. He says, Congress is back. Time to cut, cap, and balance. All caps there. There is no revenue problem. In other words, there's enough money coming in. And Mike Meharry, an article that I'm going to cover later, briefly covers this as well. There is no problem with the amount of money. Like the least of our problems is the amount of money that they steal from us through taxation. That is the least of our problems. The problem is spending. And that's exactly what Trump has said. Ron Paul talked about this for a long time. Of course, Peter Schiff has been talking about this. We cover this as well. The spending is the greatest problem. He says there is no revenue problem. That's correct, Donald J. Trump. The debt limit cannot be raised until spending is contained, which is an interesting statement because there would be no need to raise the debt limit if they cut back on spending. Well, you would think so because the debt limit is pretty insane. That was on July 6th, 2011, and Donald Trump was 100% correct. Now let's move forward a little bit. I think 2013 is this next one. He says, I cannot believe the Republicans are extending the debt ceiling. I'm a Republican, and I am embarrassed. This is what the man pretty much ran on, was that the Republican establishment, the Bush types, the Cheneys, their foreign policy and their spending, the Paul Ryans, the John Boehners of the world, they were basically empowering the Obama administration by doing tons of spending, raising the debt ceiling. They're being awful. And Trump was right to call him out on this. And this is why I think many people who are on the margins went his direction in the last election. And then in 2016, 2011, 2013, very solid. 2016, he's running for office. He also says some good things, whether they were realistic or not, but the goal was correct. He was in an interview with the Washington Post, and maybe they took him out of context. I only go to the Washington Post from time to time. I won't sign up to pay for them. I use all kinds of incognito. They're pretty good at trying to get you to pay for stuff, but they are not worth spending any money. So I am not able to actually read this, so maybe someone can correct me if there was some context screwed up. But basically, they quoted him, and you can look through Google, find tons of quotes on this, where he basically was suggesting that it's important to get rid of the debt. Now, they may have misquoted him, saying that he was going to do it over a period of 8 years. The national debt at the time was $19 trillion. But his insistence, whether they were overstating what he said or not, which happens all the time, the fact of the matter is that he was focused on saying that having so much debt is bad, just like what George Washington told us, just like what I would say. Absolutely correct. Having that amount of debt is bad. Now, whether he's misquoted as saying some unrealistic thing of being able to get rid of it in 8 years or not is another story. But that's the way the headlines go. The real lesson is that Donald Trump, the candidate, again told us that getting rid of the debt was really important. And this is while he's running for office. And he insisted, this is what from the Hill they say, he insisted in the interview that, quote, renegotiating all of our deals would help pay down the debt by sparking economic growth. He goes on, the power is trade. Our trade deals are so bad, Trump said. I would immediately start renegotiating our trade deals with Mexico, China, Japan, and all these countries that are absolutely destroying us. Whatever that may mean, the bottom line, again, is the debt was too high at $19 trillion. Now, we all know that it's approaching 23, and it's really, really worse today than it was then. And for those of you who are apologists for the current president, and this could be, you could listen or watch this at any time because it's always the current president, when they change their approach to something or they do something opposite of what they've run on or talked about, there are people who make excuses. And you know what? Whatever the excuse is, when you're at $19 trillion to start and it gets worse, there is no excuse. You should definitely never make it worse. Just slowing down the worseness is still driving everyone to the edge of the cliff. It's really bad news. Now, a couple months later, I found this interview with Forbes. And maybe this helps me understand a little bit about how maybe the Post was taking him out of context, which wouldn't be surprising. And they asked him about this. Hey, you said you could pay off the country's debt in 10 years. How is that possible? Oh, this wasn't Forbes. It's Fortune. Anyways, all the links will be in the show notes once I publish that shortly after the show is done broadcasting live. Again, 10thAmendmentCenter.com/path-to-liberty if you want to look at all the links and read it. And he said he didn't say 10 years. But how much could he pay off? He says, quote, you could pay off a percentage of it. 19 trillion, paying off a percentage of it would be less than 19 trillion. You don't cut the debt by increasing it. You don't pay it off by going from 19 to 23. Someone want to explain to me how? That's fine, but it isn't being cut. So again, whether he was going to pay all of it or 5% or 1%, the point is having too much debt is bad. Again, while a candidate. And they ask him, what percentage? And he says, it depends on how aggressive you want to be. I'd rather not be so aggressive. Don't forget, we have to rebuild the infrastructure of our country. We have to rebuild our military, which is being decimated by bad decisions, which is both of these statements are garbage. We have to do a lot of things. The only thing that anyone has to do when they're elected to office is follow their oath to the Constitution. There is nothing else. I cannot stop reiterating that. I know that's been a theme for those of you who've been watching lately. That has been a theme of mine, but that is the only thing they do. All these politicians talk about how their number one priority is to keep us safe, build infrastructure, take care of our boys in blue, whatever it may be. Their only job is to follow the Constitution. And if they suck at the Constitution, if they're at least explaining that they're following under their own understanding, we can hold some respect for them. But anything else, I don't give them any respect for. He goes on, we have to do a lot of things. We have to reduce our debt. We have to reduce our debt. And reduce our debt in an Orwellian world means increase it. He said, and the best thing we have going now is that interest rates are so low and that lots of good things can be done that aren't being done amazingly. We don't want to talk about how the Fed is destroying the value of the dollar by manipulating interest rates and printing, but that's another episode in and of itself. So that's a little walk down memory lane. George Washington telling us how bad and dangerous having national debt is, how much we should cherish it, and the reasons for it. How the president in 2011, 2013, and 2016 talked about reducing it, and now we get into the Orwellian hellhole that is our reality. Now, for those of you who might be tuning in for the first time, don't even think for a minute the Orwellian hellhole started in what year? 2016, 2017? This has been going on for a long, long time. All of these, you don't get to 23 trillion in debt in 4 years. Obviously, Obama spent like crazy. And I know a lot of people will say, well, Obama was worse. If your only defense of somebody is that Obama was worse, someone who many people would consider to be the worst president in history, if you're just better than the worst president in history, or the second worst, or the fifth worst, whatever it may be, if you're just better than one of the worst ever, that is not a compliment. That is way too low of a bar. Again, not sticking to the oath of the Constitution. So let's look at this really awful bill that was passed by the Imperial House. And I'm not going to get into a lot of detail to it because, you know what? When you're talking trillions of dollars, it's really, really bad. I don't know how else to put it. It is really, really bad. And the problem is that they're bragging about it. This is what Mike Meharry reported last week. Actually, it was Friday we published this. The bill increases discretionary spending from $1.32 trillion in the current fiscal year to 1.3. Mind you, the current fiscal year, this was passed by a Republican-controlled Congress and signed by a Republican president. What they passed last year, to go here, this wasn't Nancy Pelosi. The New Deal was with Nancy. It increases discretionary spending from 1.32 trillion to 1.37. Oh, 0.05 trillion. It's still going up in fiscal 2020 and then raises it again to 1.375 the year after that. The deal, what a deal, will allow for an increase in both domestic and military spending. And I will tell you, and I tweeted this, the last thing that is a problem for this country is the amount of money that is being spent on the military. That is the last problem that we have. The least of it. I mean, I don't think it's a problem at all when your country spends more on so-called defense than the next 8 to 10 countries combined. No one's even close. If they were smarter about how they spent money, maybe they could actually have national defense instead of national offense and a waste. The bureaucracy is nasty. But it's an increase in both domestic and military spending. So, of course, politicians on one side, they're saying, oh, well, you know, we didn't really we wanted to rein in the out-of-control Pentagon spending. But, you know, we made a deal because we got increases in domestic spending, which is what we want. And vice versa. We don't really want extra domestic spending, but we've got an increase for the military. So, in other words, Mike puts it, no spending cuts. None. Again, if you look back, what was it? 2011. There is no revenue problem is what Donald J. Trump tweeted out. The debt limit cannot be raised until spending is contained. And I don't know how spending is contained when you're increasing spending $320 billion over existing law and suspends the debt ceiling until mid-2021. In other words, if you're suspending the debt ceiling, that means there is zero limit. There is nothing. And for all we know, they're going to go absolutely ape with this in the near future, which, I mean, this already is. Poof, Mike writes, debt ceiling eliminated. Just keep on borrowing, boys. I like how he put that. The deal is a product of bipartisan cooperation. He put that in quotes. I think that's what they're talking about. Nancy Pelosi, our good, Constitution-loving, fiscal conservative Nancy Pelosi, hammered out the deal with Trump's Treasury Secretary Steve Mnuchin. So just to be clear, Mike writes, this bill has the full support of President Trump. Not good at all. But if you think about it, this really tells us what party politics is like, because when politicians, activists, they don't have power, they often say positive things. Cut here, end this department, end this program. And once they get into power, we all know the famous saying, power corrupts, absolute power corrupts absolutely. You don't have to have absolute power to have a corrupting influence on your actions. And maybe they all know it anyways, because people who want to run for office, it is a rare thing. And when I say rare, I really mean it is a once-in-a-lifetime rare thing that someone runs for and obtains national power when they're a good human being. The amount of power in Washington, D.C., the amount of corruption, the dirt, the slime that people have to go through, And I think for people who've watched TV shows about this, certainly there is truth in some of the drama that we see. There's much truth that we see just watching C-SPAN, for example. You have to be kind of a slime ball to get there. You have to want a lot of power. And that's not a really good human being in my books. So this tells us a lot, and all we have to do is look back. I think a lot of people forget what happened in early 2018, this omnibus spending bill that they passed, $1.3 trillion. This came from Republicans, Republican-controlled, of course. Some will say they're not conservatives, they're not real Republicans. That's like a lot of progressives or liberals will say Nancy Pelosi isn't a real progressive, she's not a real liberal. Other people are, AOC are more representative. Everybody's going to talk about who's a real Republican, real Democrat, real conservative, real progressive. It doesn't matter. The bottom line is Republicans and Democrats are giving the president, again, the current president, like the last one, trillions of dollars. This has nothing to do. There is no constitutionally limited government that could come even close to this at all. And while I recognize that in practice, the people have not elected someone that wants to do that, that doesn't mean we're going to be okay with it. We could never be okay with this kind of garbage because it's really dangerous. Washington warned us it's dangerous. I will get to how James Madison warned us how dangerous it is. Well, I wonder if anybody can guess what Madison had to say who may have heard me talk about it in the past. So back in March of 2018, just a little over a year ago, President Donald Trump signed a $1.3 trillion omnibus spending bill, even as he slammed the large parts of it, as well as the process that saw it arrive at his desk. And he says, quote, this is from Newsweek, "There are a lot of things that I'm unhappy about in this bill. There are a lot of things that we shouldn't have had in this bill." Absolutely correct. I agree with that. But we were, in a sense, forced, if we want to build our military, we were forced to have. My aside here, again, his oath is to the Constitution. He does not take an oath to more military spending. Whether you want it or not, the oath is to the Constitution, and you don't trade off part of the Constitution or all of it to get one particular policy goal done, or any. It's wrong at all times. You cannot defend this at all. There are some things that we should have in this bill, but I say to Congress, this is with Trump again, that I will never sign another bill like this again. And of course, apologists for the president will tell us that this bill, the $1.35 trillion or $1.375 trillion, eliminating the debt ceiling until after the next election, they'll tell us that this bill is not like the last one. He's not, when he signs this, which he will if it gets to his desk, and there's no reason to think that the Imperial Senate will not pass it. He will sign this. He wants this. He's cheering about it. He's bragging about the spending deal that he put together with Nancy Pelosi, which is pretty disgusting in my book. They're going to say it's different, but it isn't. It's another $1.3 trillion plus. This one's actually worse. So no, maybe he's not signing another bill like this one. He's signing another bill plus. He's signing an even worse one. He says, I'm not going to do it again. Nobody read it. It's only hours old. So if that's maybe his only complaint was that nobody read it, which I think is a lie. I mean, we know people don't read these bills, but I don't think that's the reason that he's saying he's not going to sign it, or that he will never sign one like it again. And for those of you who think that Newsweek took him out of context, I pulled up Donald J. Trump's tweet on this as well. And this is not some kind of joke that he said, quote, "As a matter of national security, I've signed the omnibus spending bill. Let's compare that with George Washington. As a very important source of strength and security, cherish public credit." And how do you do this? Cultivate peace. Spend less. Have less debt. That's national security. Have a strong military, strong national defense, not a national offense based around the world. That is not how you have an important source of strength and security. Totally opposite. But of course, we're always told everything's for national security. And when they tell you it's for your protection, it usually means so we can rip you off and we can control you. So he says, as a matter of national security, this was March 23rd, 2018, 4:01 p.m., maybe Eastern time. He says, I've signed the omnibus spending bill. I say to Congress, I will, all caps, never sign another bill like this again. To prevent this omnibus situation from ever happening again, I'm calling on Congress to give me a line item veto for all government spending bills. I didn't realize that was authorized in the Constitution. The president has the power to veto something he sends to his desk, not pick and choose little parts of whether he's going to veto. And in fact, if he feels that there's any part that's unconstitutional, it's his role and duty to veto all of it. And anything that's already on the books, it's his role and duty to try to undermine it and refuse to participate in anything that he thinks is unconstitutional anyways. But of course, he doesn't say as a matter of my duty, my oath to the Constitution. He says his oath looks like to national security, or maybe he doesn't even care about the oath. I don't know, but this is bad news. He will never sign it again. We'll see what's going to happen this week. If he vetoes it, I will cheer him for it. Maybe he set me up to say that this guy is really bad and dangerous, and we might as well have, in a way, we were warned that we would have massive national debt and gun control and surveillance and all these things if Hillary were elected. I don't know. Maybe it would have been worse. On the other hand, maybe Donald Trump would still have been using his influence and impact to actually oppose spending like he did when Obama was in office and so many other Republicans that have joined on in this kind of garbage. Meharry puts it this way as well. One has to wonder why they even bother to call it a debt ceiling. It's a great question. When Congress simply raises it every time government pushes up against it. Debt elevator seems like a much more accurate term. And he points out again that the problem that we have is spending. And that's what he says. The problem is spending. The reason he points this out is because a lot of mainstream pundits, so-called economists, MMT supporters, they talk about the problem being tax cuts. Tax cuts are a great thing. They should cut. Taxation is theft. They're stealing from you. The less stealing, the better. And even if they're not stealing as much from me, if they're not stealing as much from some other person, I'm happy about that too. I do not like theft. So I oppose it in all of its forms. At least philosophically, I'm not always able to resist it. I have to participate. I give the IRS money all the time. Because if I don't, they're going to come and get me. I'm too prominent in what I do. And not that I'm huge or anything, but I would think that they're going to make an example of me. And that is not smart. I cannot fight from prison. I cannot live a happy life fighting the IRS. So yes, I am glad to see tax cuts. But tax cuts, while they do increase deficits, the tax cut itself doesn't increase the deficit. It's only if you have less revenue and you cut. So let's say taxes are the only source of revenue and it's here and your spending is here. When you cut the tax and you have the same amount of spending or you increase the spending, you're going to have a larger deficit. That's pretty simple stuff. And again, Meharry points out that they're increasing spending year over year over year. And maybe it was higher in the early days of Obama. But again, if you're just somewhat less bad than Obama, you're pretty awful. And Meharry says, Uncle Sam has so far spent $3.36 trillion in fiscal 2019. That's up 6.6%. Republicans, he says, are fond of criticizing Democrats as big spenders. And of course they do this when they're out of office or when it doesn't actually have an impact. And they are. They are fond of criticizing them, and Democrats are big spenders. And they're worse when they don't have any opposition, just like Republicans are worse when they partner with Democrats or have no opposition. But the current spending spree comes to you courtesy of the GOP. This was before the Imperial House passed this last one. A Republican Congress passed the spending bills last year, and President Trump signed off on every single penny of it. And then to wrap this up, I'm going to look at the chat here in just a moment and see what's going on there. I'm sure it's going to be fun and interesting. James Madison, the so-called father of the Constitution, he tells us a little bit about debt in this. This was political observations he wrote in 1795, I believe. And I've used this quote many times. But he talks about three things that are the greatest danger to the public liberty, the greatest threat to us. He says this, of all the enemies to public liberty, War is perhaps the most to be dreaded because it comprises and develops the germ of every other. War is the parent of armies. From these proceed debts and taxes. And armies and debts and taxes are the known instruments for bringing the many under the domination of the few. Armies and debts and taxes. And although I'm focusing right now on debt and spending, the so-called land of the free is 3 for 3 on James Madison's warning. So I hope you guys are finding this interesting and fun to watch. Let's take a look and see what's going on here in the live chat here. Shane Lackey is absolutely correct, pointing out that a Fed note is a loan at interest to you. Fed note equals debt. Everyone is honest until they are the banker, says Justin. And that's, I think, everyone's honest about power until they have the power. They flip-flop all the time. Discretionary spending, Charla Biggers, is what led us to this point. They're nuts with that, right? Brock Story, Trump and 90% of Republicans are rhinos. Eric Nance, how insane, good to see you, Eric, is it to overspend on military defense infrastructure in an effort to secure us from any potential military enemy by driving us into debt, making us economically vulnerable through economic warfare to a handful of wealthy individuals? And that's actually a really good point. The more that you run into debt, the more a crash is going to just bring a country to its knees as well. So this is very, very dangerous. Dennis Gutke says it's all a two-party of one. We need to break for it. The Chicken Man, there is a relationship between budget deficits and trade deficit, but the causal direction is the former to the latter. Oh, okay, that's really interesting. Trillions and trillions and trillions and trillions and trillions, says Shane Lackey. Ward Lawrence says Trump has only 5 years to eliminate the debt. And Ward, the clock is ticking. If he even wins, I know Peter Schiff doesn't think he's going to win, but if he does, I think it's actually going to keep getting worse. I know I saw another Washington Post headline where Trump said, he supposedly is telling his aides privately, as long as he wins in 2020, prepare for sweeping budget cuts. Now we're finally going to do it. That tells me that the goal is party more than anything else. You make things worse. You don't violate people's rights and rip them off more and more to make things better. So, and even if he isn't going to eliminate it completely, to reduce it, it's got to be below 19 trillion. It has to be below 19 trillion or he's a total failure. Gabriel Mueller says, thanks for all the great work, Michael. Can you guys reach out to Justin and Mosh in order to combine forces with him? That's okay. Awesome. I want to work with as many people who want to support the Constitution against this two-party scam as possible. So absolutely. Shane Lackey, infrastructure is not... Shane, you are killing it today, man. And Gabriel says over on Facebook, does the national debt even matter to millennials? There was a liberal blogger today, kind of a legal blogger guy. I can't think of his name, but we retweeted a meme of George Washington that I made just recently. Let me see if I can find, man, there's a lot of feedback on Twitter. Thank you guys for following. Some kind of a liberal legal scholar basically said, hey, note to millennials, think about this. Think about this national debt. This is really dangerous. So I think some people are catching it. Maybe they're only thinking about that from a perspective of not controlling the reins of power, just like we saw while Obama was in office. I don't know. Ward Lawrence says the Orwellian hellhole began at the creation of the Federal Reserve. You probably have a good point. 1913 was a real crazy year. Bob Brewer, good to see you, buddy. And thank you for the email talking about stare decisis. I saw that, and Publius as well. I appreciate that. Defense is not only duty, but the existential one. And I would make the case that what they do on this military spending is not national defense. They are not actually spending on defense. They're spending on programs. They're basically a socialist militarist welfare plan, basically. Gerard Perry says, Ron Kessler, I'm not familiar with Ron, has written some great books exposing this. I think you have to at least be partially sociopathic. Oh, you're commenting about who actually gets into office to make a career out of government and politics. Hopefully my job is in politics, but Maybe my therapist will have something to say about that. I have not read about Ron, but that's Gerard. If you have a link to any book that you recommend, post that in the chat. I'd love to check it out. At least maybe add it to my list. Ward says they need to add an anti-omnibus bill, one issue per bill at a time. I think Downsize D.C. has a one issue at a time act that they've been working on for a number of years. And Sarah Andrus, man, there's some really good feedback. I really appreciate all this. This is awesome. Thank you, guys. Sarah Andrus says this isn't primarily a politician problem. Great point. It's a citizen problem. Politicians, so I've often argued something similar, basically saying, look, in a way, the worst of the worst in politics is in a way a market response. Politicians blow with the wind. And they are certainly looking at polls. They want to win. They want power. They want to keep office, or they want to get in a position to get some kind of great contractor job in the future, book deal, speaking, whatever. So they like having power. But of course, like H.L. Mencken said, democracy is the theory of government that people know what they want and deserve to get it good and hard. And it's this notion, of course, what Sarah is pointing out that I agree with here, that the worst politicians, they're advancing policies that a lot of the public likes. So we can't necessarily only think about politicians, and that is a great reminder, at least for me as well, hopefully for you guys as well. Thank you for pointing that out, Sarah. That's really good. Andrew Nappy says it's easier to go after Elijah Cummings than go after the debt. The red meat content is greater and it doesn't strain the attention span of the herd. Oh, man, always good. EHP training, no scolding for being late. Appreciate you stopping by. And State Militias says Dennis Marburger, good to see you. Were a key ingredient to the defense posture and fiscal prudence that Madison, Washington, Jefferson advocated, right? And I did an episode on this sometime maybe around May or so, talking about how standing armies, they were dangerous, and that militias and the right to keep and bear arms, not just in organized militias, but the right to keep and bear arms, the individual right, was to protect against this, to protect against the need to have a massive standing army, which leads to debts and taxes, which James Madison told us were the known instruments for putting the many under the domination of the few. Bob Ferguson, if they can print money out of thin air, why is there debt? That's a great question as well. I don't have a quick answer for it, but I think it is a kind of a double, triple effect when you go there as well. Frank I says, when they disarm us all, you will see true democracy, no doubt. Anyways, rambling on here, I really appreciate all the feedback in the live chat. I guess we can wrap this up. I hope you found it interesting. It pisses me off. I hope it pisses you off as well, because if it doesn't, I don't know how much help we're going to be here as well. But things are really bad, and the fix does not come from Washington, D.C. electing one politician or one team over the other who sounds good when they're out of power, never seems to produce the results. Unabated government continues to grow and grow and grow in size, scope, the national debt, in danger, and they're constantly violating your liberty at every turn possible. Again, thank you so much for spending some time with me today. I hope you had an awesome weekend. Your Monday is off to a good start. Find all of the archives at 10thamendmentcenter.com/path-to-liberty. Of course, smash the like button. I did not mention that earlier. If you like the show, smash that like button. That really helps us a lot. All of the platforms you watch or listen on are very easily triggered. So anything that tells the algorithm in there, a like, a comment, a share, all that stuff tells the platform, tells the algorithm to show the program to more people. So it's free and easy to do. I appreciate you taking those actions to help us out. I'll see you on Wednesday and Friday again this week. I hope you have an awesome Monday. And thank you again for spending some time with me today.